You know that feeling when you finish a huge project? You stand back, take a deep breath, and just think, it's done. Well, building Jerusalem's wall was exactly that, a massive achievement for Nehemiah and the Israelites. But what happens after the big win? That's what we're diving into, because the end of the book of Nehemiah shows us a really powerful truth. Finishing the work is just the beginning. Keeping the work going, that's the real challenge.
All right, so the wall is up. The city is safe from its enemies. Mission accomplished, right? Well, not exactly. A city isn't just stone and mortar, is it? The real challenge now shifts from building a physical wall to rebuilding a spiritual community. It's not about bricks anymore, it's about hearts. How do you actually restore the soul of a people? That question is what drives the rest of this incredible story.
And that's exactly where Nehemiah starts in chapter 11. They don't just stand around admiring their handiwork. Nope, they've got a huge strategic problem to solve. I mean, you can have the strongest fortress in the world, but if nobody lives there, it's just an empty shell. The goal now was to turn Jerusalem back into a living, breathing, thriving city.
So here was the deal. You had the leaders and the officials living inside the new walls, but pretty much everyone else was still scattered in the towns and villages all around. A capital city needs more than just good defenses. It needs people. People to give it life, to run its economy, and most importantly, to be the vibrant, beating heart of the nation's worship.
So what do? How do you convince people to move? Their solution was pretty clever and, honestly, profound. They cast lots. Now, for them, this wasn't just a roll of the dice. It was a way of asking for God's guidance. And the result? 1 out of every 10 families was chosen to pack up their entire lives and move into the holy city. I mean, can you imagine getting that news? Your new home just got picked for you, all for the sake of the nation.
And it wasn't just left up to the lottery. It was actually a really smart 3-part plan. First, you had the rulers, who were already there leading by example. Then you had this amazing group of volunteers who just raised their hands and said, "We'll go." The Bible says the people actually blessed them for their courage. And finally, you had the 1 in 10 chosen by lot who were stepping up to do their civic and spiritual duty.
And that's why this was so much more than just a change of address. Moving to Jerusalem was a powerful act of commitment. These families were leaving behind established homes, farms, everything they knew, to dedicate themselves to the very place God had chosen. It was a massive statement of faith in God's plan for their future.
Okay, so now the city has people. What comes next? It's finally time to celebrate. Chapter 12 is really the emotional peak of the entire book. After all the opposition, all the hard work, all the strategic planning, this is the moment. They officially dedicate the wall to God, and it is just an explosion of pure joy.
But listen, this was no ordinary party. The very first thing they did was track down all the Levites, the tribes set apart for temple service and spiritual leadership, and bring them to Jerusalem. And that one detail, it tells you everything about their priorities. This celebration had to be a true act of worship, led by the right people and filled with singing, thanksgiving, and just pure gratitude.
So to pull this off, Nehemiah organizes this incredible procession. He forms 2 massive choirs, and get this, they climb up on top of the new wall. One choir starts marching to the right, the other to the left, circling the entire city in opposite directions. Can you just imagine the sight and the sound? Praise was literally surrounding Jerusalem, and then they all met up at the temple for this huge, unified worship service. Just incredible.
And the result was this unforgettable moment. The joy wasn't quiet or polite. No, it was loud. It was overwhelming. It was a celebration with men, women, and children. The Bible says it was so profound that the sound of their rejoicing could be heard from far, far away. What a testament to what God had accomplished through them.
But you know, true worship always spills over into action. In the middle of all this joy, the people were inspired to get things back in order. They immediately restored the system of tithes, bringing 1/10 of their produce to support the priests and Levites. This meant the temple workers could fully dedicate themselves to their ministry, ensuring the house of God was running just as it was meant to.
But the story doesn't just end on that spiritual high note. The final chapter is, well, it's a bit of a reality check. It's a sobering reminder that even after a massive victory, the work is never really done. The fight for spiritual purity requires constant, and I mean constant, vigilance.
So here's what went down. Nehemiah had to go back to Persia to resume his duties for King Artaxerxes. He was gone for a while. And wouldn't you know it, as soon as his leadership was gone, things started to slide. When he finally got back to Jerusalem, he was absolutely horrified by the spiritual compromise that had crept back into the community.
And Nehemiah, he doesn't mess around. He doesn't form a committee or write a strongly worded letter. He takes immediate, decisive action. He finds out that Tobiah, one of their main enemies, had been given a fancy room right inside the temple court, so Nehemiah personally throws all of his stuff out and has the rooms purified. He finds the Levites have been abandoned again, so he restores the tithe system. He sees business booming on the Sabbath, so he orders the city gates shut to stop it. And he confronts the men who had married foreign wives, reminding them that this was the very same sin that brought down King Solomon.
This contrast is really the heart of this last chapter. The people had drifted into complacency, they made a few small compromises here and there, and it led to a serious spiritual mess. In response, Nehemiah brought courage. He absolutely refused to look the other way. He took huge risks to hold people accountable and restore holiness according to God's law.
So, as we wrap up this incredible book, what are the big lessons from these final chapters? What can we learn about building something that actually lasts?
I think it really boils down to three core ideas. First, commitment. A real community isn't built on what's easy, it's built on personal sacrifice. Second, joyful worship. The whole point of all this work is to end up in heartfelt, genuine praise to God. And third, spiritual vigilance. You can never, ever get comfortable. Protecting what God has restored is a constant, ongoing battle. It's a process, not a project you just finish.
And that really leaves us with this final thought. It's one thing to have a moment of restoration, a big event. But the story of Nehemiah's final chapter really forces us to ask a much deeper question. Once it's built, once it's restored, what does it truly take to sustain it for the long haul? The answer, it seems, is everything.